And now we are fortunate to have Professor Olivia Chilcote. Dr. Chilcote is Luiseño and a member of the San Luis Rey Band of Mission Indians. Dr. Chilcote received her PhD and MA from the Department of Ethnic Studies at UC Berkeley. She is currently an assistant professor of American Indian Studies at San Diego State University and a critical mission study postdoctoral fellow in the Department of History at UC Riverside. Her research investigates the politics and history of federal recognition in California and how legal status affects unrecognized tribes throughout the state. Dr. Chilcote.
Oops, I didn't unmute my microphone. So thank you for the introduction, Assemblymember Ramos, and thank you to everyone who's joining us today. So I want to start off by acknowledging that I'm presenting from Kumeyaay land. So similarly to Eve, I'm going to read a brief version of the San Diego State land acknowledgement. So for millennia, the Kumeyaay people have been a part of this land. This land has nourished, healed, protected, and embraced them for many generations in a relationship of balance and harmony. As members of the San Diego State community, we acknowledge this legacy. We promote this balance and harmony. We find inspiration from this land, the land of the Kumeyaay. And I also want to give a special shout out to the San Diego State Native Resource Center watch party that's going on right now, and to a special member of the audience, my mom. Hi, Mom. My presentation today is focusing on contemporary effects of Spanish colonization and how it specifically relates to the status of federal recognition for California tribes. So one of the most critical issues facing Native peoples today in the United States is the federal acknowledgement of Native American tribal nations. Also known as federal recognition, the federal acknowledgement means that the federal government officially recognizes a tribe's inherent sovereignty. Federal acknowledgement policy sustains an arbitrary hierarchy among tribes and Native people, while also perpetuating a legacy of US control over definitions of tribal nationhood and Native identity. Most tribes gain federally recognized status on an ad hoc basis, resulting from past interactions with the government. For example, the presence of ratified treaties, congressional legislation, or the establishment of reservations serve as clear indicators of the federal government's acknowledgement of a tribe as both a political entity and a racialized group of people. Federal recognition affirms a government-to-government relationship with the US. It enables tribes to enact the rights and responsibilities of tribal nationhood, such as maintaining and exercising jurisdiction over trust lands, and it also makes tribes eligible for services and programs administered through the federal government and by its various agencies like the Bureau of Indian Affairs and the Indian Health Service. Non-federally acknowledged tribes or unrecognized tribes are not considered sovereign nations with a government-to-government relationship, even though they still possess inherent tribal sovereignty. Unrecognized tribes can become federally recognized through Congress, the courts, or through the executive branch via a method called the federal acknowledgement process. Over 350 tribes across the nation are seeking federal acknowledgement through the federal acknowledgement process, which assesses tribal eligibility through 7 mandatory criteria. In California, there are more unrecognized tribes and more unrecognized tribes seeking recognition through the federal acknowledgement process than in any other state. The Office of Federal Acknowledgement, which is the entity within the Department of the Interior that manages the applications and the process, their last published report on recognition data stated that 81 tribal groups from California took the first step towards pursuing the process by submitting a letter of intent to petition. And that number, the 81 number, is a little bit misleading because that's not the number of unrecognized tribes in the state. That's the number of letters of intent to actually go through the that were received at one point. So the Native American Heritage Commission, for example, reports that there are 55 unrecognized tribes, but I've also seen some other sources state around a little over 70, so it's somewhere in that range. So since the creation of the federal acknowledgement process in 1978, only one tribe from California has been recognized through the process, and that tribe is the Death Valley Timbishaw Shoshone tribe, and they were acknowledged in 1982, and that their acknowledgement was effective January 3rd of 1983. The vexed status of federal recognition in California has been a concern for unrecognized tribes and allies for a very long time. Many reports, special commissions, individuals, and tribes have tried for decades to urge the BIA or Congress to create something that can account for what I've called the California conundrum. Some of the most significant recommendations came from the efforts of the Advisory Council on California Indian Policy that was established by a congressional act in 1997. This Advisory Council was really important and significant because it was the first time that California Indians were to report directly to Congress about the issues most important to us. One of the task force within that council was the Task Force on Recognition. And they found that at every hearing that was conducted, it was confirmed that clarification of tribal legal status was the primary issue of concern to California Indians. A final outcome from the Advisory Council's report to Congress was that the federal acknowledgement process is inherently flawed for California tribes, specifically because of the historical injustices faced by California Indians since the beginning of US settler colonial control, including horrific genocide, failure to ratify treaties, and a pattern of federal neglect. However, the Advisory Council never specifically pointed to the impacts of Spanish and later Mexican colonization on federal recognition outcomes for tribes in the state. I argue, along with other scholars and Native peoples, that an analysis of the multiple regimes of colonial control in California is necessary to fully understand the complexities of federal recognition for California tribes today. Which takes us to what's more relevant for this panel, thinking about Spanish missionaries and how that affects federal recognition today. So the Spanish Franciscan missionaries had the two explicit goals to convert and civilize Native peoples through an extensive enculturation program that can be considered cultural genocide. The destruction of California Indian life and culture as a result of the mission system is a point that anthropologists and other scholars studying California Indians made quite often. Many of these scholars declared that the, quote, mission Indians and their cultures were extinct by the late 1800s and early 1900s, and only vestiges of pre-contact life remained in certain instances. For example, Alfred Kroeber's field research privileged tribes that were not severely impacted by Spanish missionization. When he encountered tribes like the Ohlone of the San Francisco Bay Area, he considered them, quote, extinct so far as all practical purposes are concerned, end quote, and he did not study them as extensively. Kroeber's opinions were especially damning since he and his colleagues in the Department of Anthropology at UC Berkeley shaped the field of California anthropology and the study of California Indians. Anthropologists like Kroeber and others were, of course, wrong about California Indian culture completely disappearing due to Spanish colonization. We know this not only because of the thriving California Indian cultures we see all around us today, but also because of the research from an array of disciplines that presents evidence of the various methods California Indian peoples use to resist Spanish colonization, which is something that I think you touched on in her presentation as well. So the influence that this early anthropological research had, though, cannot be understated, because Indian agents for the United States use this kind of anthropological documentation to determine the government's interaction with certain tribes over others. So in other words, these officials used anthropological information as a means for not engaging with the quote unquote extinct or unrecognizable tribal groups. Federal policymakers and land allotters would often ignore these tribes, and many were left landless and without means for support. Scholars on this topic contend that the fraught connection between Spanish colonization and early anthropological study has contributed to the federally recognized status of tribes across the state today. Mapping out where federally recognized tribes are located visually shows that the majority are located away from the historic route of Spanish missionization. So I want to share my screen really quick to show everyone a map comparison. So hopefully this works. Oh no. Okay, actually it's not working. So I'll just describe it to you. So if you can think of, or you're on a computer right now, if you want to Google just the route of the missions, you'll see, they're dotted along the coast. But then if you were to, have another map of where the federally recognized tribes are located today, you would see that it looks pretty bare along the coast. And there's just a couple. In the northern part, there is the Federated Indians of Great and Rancheria, sort of the Sonoma and Marin County, so northern San Francisco Bay. Then it's not for another about 330 something miles south until you get to the Santa Ynez band of Chumash Indians, and their reservation is there. But then, so again, like I said, it looks pretty bare in terms of federally recognized tribes. But then you can see that once you get to San Diego, however, there are very many federally recognized tribes. And you can see that those federally recognized tribes, which were associated with the San Luis Rey mission and the San Diego mission, are, of course, today recognized. So why is this the case? This is the case because Spanish padres imposed a relocation policy called Reducción that displaced many California Indians from their homelands and disrupted their traditional ways of life. So the goal of relocating Native peoples was to populate the mission grounds and to turn it into a self-supporting and self-sufficient community. Native people needed to be there so that the mission would have a labor force, the Padres would have easy access to people for conversion purposes, and so that the Padres and the military could maintain surveillance over everyone. The extremity of the Reducción policy was applied differently across the mission system, leaving some tribes more heavily impacted than others. Ohlone, Chumash, Esalen, Gabrieleño, Tongva, and other tribes along coastal California were removed from their traditional villages and forced to live on mission grounds populated with Native peoples from various villages, sometimes speaking different languages. Alternatively, Padres at San Luis Rey and San Diego, the southernmost missions, practiced a modified form of Reducción. Unlike other missions that congregated Indian people around the mission locale, only the unmarried girls and women, the sick, the elderly, and some craft specialists lived at Mission San Luis Rey and San Diego. The other Liseño and Kumeyaay, and there were also some Kuya and Capeños that were baptized in those missions as well, they were able to return to their personal homes and villages, some of which were within the San Luis Rey Valley, as well as further east and north, and again, surrounding the Mission San Diego area. So they were able to go back to their villages after they attended certain events or performing labor at the mission. So Native peoples at Mission San Luis Rey and Mission San Diego experienced missionization in a different way than California Indians associated with other missions. The divergence in policy and its effects can be seen most prominently in data on population trends. So Luiseño and Kumeyaay did not experience the steep population declines that other tribes in mission areas did. Various scholars argue that the tribes subjected to this modified version of reduction were able to retain more of their traditional cultural practices as a result, and because they weren't as impacted by political reorganization. So tribes in San Diego County associated with the southernmost missions were then studied more in depth by anthropologists because of this modified reduction policy, and again, underscoring the fact that anthropologists, the anthropological studies done has this really important effect on how the US government then dealt with various tribes. But wait, there's more to the story. There's even more complexity. So within San Diego County, there is an unrecognized tribe. So the San Luis Rey Band of Mission Indians, the tribe that I am a member of, is the only unrecognized band of Luiseño Indians. So there's 7 Luiseño bands total. The other 6 that are federally recognized are Pechanga, Pala, Rincon, Saboba, La Jolla, and Palma. So, you know, within the exception, there's an exception. And this is the subject of my research and my forthcoming book. And so if you want to know more about our specific situation, then please keep an eye out for that. It's a teaser. But I think that this really gets back to the point that I made earlier, that an analysis of these multiple regimes of colonial control in California is really necessary to fully understand the complexities of federal recognition for California tribes today. So we can't have a blanket statement that necessarily says tribes subjected to Spanish missionization are not federally recognized today, because, you know, there are several tribes that are federally recognized who were part of the Spanish colonial project. But we do know that overwhelming majority of those tribes are unrecognized, and many of the tribes currently pursuing federal recognition are from coastal California. 3 of the 4 tribes that have been officially denied through the federal acknowledgement process were associated with missions. And one of the most recent acknowledgement actions was, it's not official, but it's a proposed negative finding for the Fernandino Tataviam Band of Mission Indians, which that tribe is associated with the San Fernando Mission. So given the fact that the majority of mission tribes are unrecognized and struggle with the federal acknowledgement process specifically, it's clear that there is still so much more work and research to be done on all of these tribes' unique history and experience with how colonization in California deeply affects tribal legal status today. So, thank you.